Well, hello there, and welcome to Australians for Better Government podcast. I'm Mark Neugebauer, Vice President for Australians for Better Government, and bringing you another segment today. Our guest today is someone that has appeared on Australians for Better Government as well, has presented at previous events as well, and has also been on a podcast for our President, Stephen Tripp's Commanding the Narrative. But just as a reminder for everybody, the Australians for Better Government website, australiansforbetter.com. If you want to find out more about what we're all about, you can jump on there. We are running a couple of events coming up in May, where our guest for today, Dr. Christopher Reynolds, will be speaking as well as some other guests there. So on the 2nd of May, we have the event there at Woodalba at the Central Coast, and that'll be on Saturday the 2nd of May. And then the following day, another event on Sunday the 3rd of May, where Dr. Reynolds will be speaking as well again, and our President Stephen Tripp and Katie McCallum, President of Let's Rethink Renewables, and another guest, Stuart Bonds, and that's on in there at Cessnock. Recommend people jump on. They can jump on our website and then register from there, get your tickets for that event. So, and the other event has Martin Stevenson, another One Nation candidate up there. So, and if you want to check out more about what we're doing, there's some articles on our website as well. You can jump on there, australiansforbetter.com, and you can check out what we're all about and what we're trying to achieve with your help, hopefully, reforming the Constitution, ensuring a true separation of powers, empowering voters, enshrining our freedoms, and instilling pride in Australia. These are all topics that you can check out on our website. Obviously, encourage people to become a member. The more people we have on board assisting us and helping us with what we're trying to do, we can get more done as well. So encourage those of you that might be watching to become a member as well. We have the Australian Flag campaign as well. Some videos on our YouTube channel, and you can obviously also subscribe to the Australians for Better Government newsletter, which will be sent out, which will keep you updated as well. So we've got some affiliated organisations as well. And if you want to contact us, even if you'd like to come on board and be interviewed for a topic around how we can improve government in Australia, reach out via the contact us there as well. Just to let you know, this obviously will be streaming to our Australians for Better Government YouTube channel. Today's guest is also appearing on some segments there before from our other events that we've held previously as well. And our President, Stephen Tripp, also has today's guest on there as well, talking about other things, but also many other interviews and discussions on commanding the narrative there as well. But let's do a little bit of an introduction into who our guest is today. So Dr. Christopher Reynolds is the author of What a Capital Idea, Australia, 1770 to 1901. So Dr. Reynolds was first listed in the International Who's Who Historical Society in 2006 and has been published in the areas of politics, business and education. Dr. Reynolds completed his PhD and master's degrees at Claremont Graduate University, one of America's most prestigious universities, where he was heavily influenced by leading academics Peter Drucker and Alvin Toffler. He was also privileged to study with Leonard Levy, America's foremost historian on constitutional law. Dr. Reynolds has held appointments with both the United States Senate and House of Representatives as senior professional staff and worked directly with Senators Ted Kennedy, Dan Coates, and Mitch McConnell. Dr. Reynolds worked on several projects with White House staff, receiving commendation from President Ronald Reagan. He also worked on several major US political campaigns. In Australia, Dr. Reynolds held the position of Executive Officer for the New South Wales Minister for Public Works, Ports, Roads and Darling Harbour, and was then the Executive Director of the World Trade Centre, Sydney. Christopher has been a school teacher, university professor, business manager and political strategist, and has applied his breadth of knowledge and experience to the writing of What a Capital Idea, Australia, 1770-1901. So, Dr. Christopher Reynolds, welcome to the Australians for Better Government podcast.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
That's okay. So you're no stranger to jumping on the podcast and talking about your experiences and life journey, and also at other events. So, look, I guess just quickly, one you could explain, just summarize. I know it's a big book, it's a thick book, but summarize, the book and what inspired you to put it together.
Well, it's supposed to be a children's book. And a friend of mine who's a publisher had been contacted by a large publisher by the name of Scholastic. And he called and said, this big company is looking for a primary school text on Australian history. And I said, primary school, Australian history. I said, well, how old are the children? He said 11. And I said, well, how long's the course? And he said, maybe 10 lectures, are sort of only one semester. And I said, well, you think we could do an Australian history in just 10 sessions, if that's how long it's going to be, for 11-year-olds. I said, well, what are you going to do? I mean, you're thinking of doing a comedy or something like Wacky Warriors or something. I mean, how do you take a big subject like Australian history and give it to children? I said, well, it's been a while since I had my head in this bucket and did the research on Australian history. So why don't I have a look at it, and I'll see what people are writing about, and I'll get back to you and we'll take it from there. So he said, all right. So I got a dozen books and I laid them on the floor, and it's basically to have a look at the contents and what people are covering. And so as I laid them on the floor and I had a look, it didn't take me long to realize how boring they all are. And it was all this horrible brownie paper, and the print was all squashed together. And if I found a fact I liked on one page, I'd be searching back trying to find a date that matched the facts. So while I was getting frustrated with the format, I then realized that these guys were basically doing the same old stuff. So he was a guy up to the 5th edition or something of a book he'd written in 1960. And another one, author A, was quoting author B, and he was quoting author C, who was back quoting author A. And around in a circle would go this information. And it was the Santa Claus syndrome. And that is, if you told yourself the same rubbish continually, you started to believe it. And that is what was happening. So these guys were saying silly things like the Australian venture coming to New South Wales was because the prisons were full in England. They're a total rot. The prison numbers in the prisons in Sydney in England had nothing to do with the venture of coming to Australia, just to pick an example. So I was getting a bit frustrated. But then I discovered that these people who call themselves historians really wanted to be novelists, and they would make things up. And the thing that got me going was Manning Clark, the famous Victorian historian, and he was saying something about MacArthur, the sheepfellow. And he said, as he lifted the Shiraz to his lips, he pushed back in his chair and stretched his legs across to rest on the banister. And as he watched the sun setting over the sunset, he pondered the price of wool on the London stock market. And I went, yuck, what rubbish is that? I mean, MacArthur was out of the country so often, he was lucky he didn't get hung at one stage, but he was probably only home visiting on a long weekend. His house faced east and he couldn't have seen the sunset. And they made a pretty rough old claret out there on the Cumberland Plain and not a Shiraz. And it was probably raining that day for all Manning Clark knew. But then here comes the research. As I got hold of the letter from Lord Glenelg to Governor Darling, he was really quite angry that the MacArthurs had been pushing him to allow a dozen Germans to come and live in Australia to grow grapes because MacArthurs couldn't work it out. So in this angry letter that I was reading, the Lord Glenelg is basically calling them foreigners. And he warns the other people in the colony, don't you think I'm going to let any more of these bloody foreigners come and live in our country, in your country, Australia. And they're only getting a 5-year visa and then they can all leave. So I learned something. Everybody coming into Australia who wasn't from Britain had to have a visa, as they do today. And I thought, that was sophisticated for, what was that, about the 1840s, I think that is. Well, then when I had a look at the letter, it wasn't to John MacArthur. It was to his son Edward, Major Edward MacArthur, and the letter was written giving permission for them to grow grapes 4 or 5 years after John had died. So John never sat on the banister, stretched his legs and drank Shiraz because he was dead by the time that the Germans arrived. So that was the sort of rubbish that was even in big books like Manning Clark. It was rubbish. He didn't know what he was talking about. And the one that sort of was almost down tools for me was I discovered the real reason of why people were being sent to Australia. And I was sort of thinking, well, what was the legislation? What was this transportation business about? And I thought, well, I'll go looking for documents on convicts, and there was nothing. Laws on, well, what else do you call them? Prisoners. And the key word was felons. So once I found the key word to be felons, I went looking for legislation, and I found it. And it goes back to 1595 with the Elizabethan Act. And this was to do with how to treat people who were in the slums of London or whatever city, who needed to be rescued and gotten out. And so they came up with a scheme, and I think it's based on Ephesians 4:28, that says, if he is a thief, let him be given labour that he might be transformed from his ways and help others. So they came up with a scheme to get people out of the country, give them work in the hope that they would have a second chance at life. So this legislation was reformed in 1717 and again in 1784 under Lord Sydney. So he knew the law. The law. And what was in this law? Well, it was to give people a second chance. And so they were not being sentenced to incarceration. They were not criminals as such. And that's why they were putting them on the hulks, because they were not being sentenced to the prisons. And the other thing I discovered in reading the law, if you were between the ages of 15 and 21, you could volunteer to be transported to the Americas or Australia. And I looked at this, you could volunteer to be transported. So I had totally the wrong idea about the people who were sent to Australia. And they were being sentenced, as you may know, from 7 years or 14 years. But when Philip got here, of the first 3 fleets, and by the time he left after 4 years, he had set free 85% of those people. Nobody did 7 years and nobody did 14 years. Their recidivism rate, I never get that right, was 2%, only 2% of reoffenders. We've got like 65% today. So that's how successful this was. And I thought, well, Manning Clark must have covered this. I'll go through his 5,000 pages, or whatever it is, and I'll find where he makes a reference. Well, I searched and searched, and eventually I found the paragraph. The paragraph, I've written a whole chapter on it, the paragraph. So let's see what Manning Clark had to say. He says, and I quote, "I haven't read it, but I know or read of a woman who has read it." Well, how on earth could Manning Clark be this great Australian historian and he had not even read the legislation to do with sending people to Australia? So I was getting angry, and then I picked up Keneally, and Keneally, I was reading him, and he's a great writer, great novelist, but I looked at a page and he could not have been saying the most ridiculous stuff that I was reading. So I called him a liar. I slammed the book. I swore at him, and I turned around and threw his blasted book in the garbage bin. I just had enough. Well, that didn't work out well for me, because it turned out to be my wife's book and I had to get it out again. So there I was. But I said to myself, well, it's down tools. I don't know what else I'm doing in my life, but this is it. I am going to now get into the original research. I'm not going to read a lot of the trash that's been written in the last 20 years, all to do with woke business and, Aborigines at every corner. And I want to get in and find what really happened. So that began the exploration to find the real documents. And so in finding them, and the story I've read in What a Capital Idea becomes a rewrite of Australian history, because there's very little that we think we know that was actually the truth. So I confront a lot of the myths and just basically show them to be what they are, that many of the academics and the media have come to rely on. So that's why it is a phenomenal book and probably the most accurate record of Australia's history that's ever been put to print.
Yeah, well done. And obviously, when you're at events, you bring the book along. People can purchase them. They can obviously purchase them as well. At the end, we can show people where else they could get them. So I have listened to you. Obviously, you've been on podcasts, you've been to our events, and I've listened to you, Christopher, about our Constitution, because we talk a lot about the Constitution of Australia at the moment, and there's a lot of talk about its relevance and how it seems we can't rely on it as well as we thought we could in regards to individual rights and freedoms. Now, I got involved through COVID, and myself. I was apolitical for a long time, but it seems that we didn't have the protections. You feel that obviously the 1901 Constitution's there. You've researched it. You've talked about is it Inglis Clark? Is it quite a bit, being one of the founding fathers and one of the main document writers of the Constitution, and many parts of it weren't adopted. Is the Constitution fit for purpose for Australia, and what is your criticism of the Constitution?
Well, how many questions was that? Let's we'll take one at a time there, I think. There's of the 42 men that went along to the 1891 Constitutional Convention, only 2 were Australians, and the rest, in representing the colonies, had been born in England. So you can sort of already detect that there's a prejudice there. And what actually was happening is that William Wentworth, another Australian, had written probably, I think, the first constitution for Britain regarding forming a government for the colony of New South Wales. So these men were all very familiar with that form of government because the other colonies got to copy it. Now, they established a bicameral political system, an upper house and a lower house, or an assembly and a council. And they were used to having a legislative council or a council advising the governor. So they'd come in and say, well, Governor, I don't think you ought to put up the taxes again for the settlers, for the squatters. Half of us are squatters and we're making too much money for you to be doing this. And he'd basically say, yes or no, I'm going to do it anyway. So they gave him advice, and the governor ran the country. The government worked, all the civil servants worked for the governor, and the legislative people did legislation. And if the governor didn't like it, he would say, no, have another shot at it, or I'm just not going to do it. So it was that form of government that was already there. Now, a strange thing happened. They wrote this legislation, it all got passed, and it had a speaker and a president, a speaker for the assembly, the lower house we'd call it, and a president, I think that's right, or a chairman for the upper house or the council. Well, all right, it all seemed to be there and functioning. And then they decided, we need to have someone in charge of the parliament. Unlike the American system, which they could see the speaker then determined with his rules committee what legislation was going to come to the floor. So they just decided that they needed a premier, a bit like the British Prime Minister. And so nothing was written. They just decided to do it. And the governor just seemed quite happy to let them have a, as it were, prime minister, someone in charge of them that they called a premier. So the colonies had been dancing along with this model for some 40 years before they got to this convention. So they had that in their head. Now, what actually happens is what stirred them even having these meetings. And I often tell people, and I think it's true, that nothing happens in politics that doesn't involve money, and to always go looking for the money trail. So where was the money in forming the Australian Constitution? Good question, because the academics don't come anywhere near what was really happening. And what had happened was that there were about 250 million or billion, it was up to £1 million of loans that the colonial governments and the private sector had taken in, which led to hundreds of billions of dollars. But the Barings Bank in England had got into a lot of trouble we'd call collapse because it had lent money to Argentina and Uruguay, and Argentina had a coup. So they weren't going to get their loans back. So they freaked out and the government bailed them out. Or didn't actually, it was the Bank of London, England, got other banks to come to their rescue. But they became quite nervous. And so with these whopping loans into Australia, they started to put pressure on the governments to make sure that their loans were being paid. And it's in that context, particularly because Victoria was so in the red, that Victoria was pressuring the other states to federate. What was federation going to do? Oh, well, we can tinker around with who's going to do what, but we will pool our national debts, our colonial debts, and make it a national debt. And then the national government, can pay off all those debts. That means that where Victoria was short of £1 or £2 to make its monthly payment, we could take money from Western Australia or Tasmania to make up the difference. And so this was the secret plan that was going on, that what was written was only, as it were, secondary. Well, it's in that context that here comes the Puritan, as it were, the man that is really into constitutions and the law. Because the guy who headed up the committee for the constitutional draft of this convention, his name was Samuel Griffiths, and he was the Premier of Queensland. Well, when pushed on it, he had not even read the American Constitution. Well, how are you going to design a constitution for a new nation if you haven't educated yourself in what you're doing? Clark was different. Clark, because he came from Tasmania, had been educated, I suppose that's the word. He had met and talked to a lot of the American whalers that had come through. And so he got to know and love the whole American system, and he decided he wanted to become a politician just as the American Civil War was ending. So he was up on all of this and had done a lot of reading, and he slowly but surely became a lawyer. But he became, as it were, Republican and understood the principles of democracy. And a bit more than that, the whole idea of the separation of powers for checks and balances to cut the tyranny of government. And so the whole business of the Americans' right to bear arms as individuals is so they can protect themselves, like the farmers have recently done, against the tyranny of government. So that was the fundamental rights that people had in a democracy. And as you may know, there were sort of from other political philosophers like Locke and Hume and Spinoza and a few French people as well. There were this concept that there were fundamental human rights or social values, as Clark would call them, of you have a right to life. Life is a value that you hold, and so does society. You have a right to equality, at least before the law, and the right to vote. One person, one vote. And you have a right to property and even the pursuit of happiness. So these sort of fundamentals that coloured the American Constitution were in Inglis Clark's original draft. So when this convention started in 91, he'd just been off to England and he'd been off to America, and his head was just full of this stuff. So he had 3 months before the convention from the time he got back from America. So he sat and wrote the Australian Constitution, 96 clauses. And in conversations with the Americans, he thought calling our federation the Commonwealth of Australia fitted in with what the British had done. The Commonwealth of Virginia and the Commonwealth of Kentucky and Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. So the Commonwealth of Australia seemed a good idea. His wife, Grace, her father had been part of the Anti-Transportation League of some years earlier, and she had a copy of their flag, which the Reverend John West, who was heading up a lot of the anti-transportation movement, had actually designed. So he went along to this convention, and as these fellows are sitting around the table on the first day discussing how they're going to move money around and pay their debts, then Inglis Clark walked into this group, and while there are 4 men sitting at the table, he slaps down the 96 clauses of a constitution. He'd written it. And while they're talking about that, he said, have you thought about a name? A name, a name. He said, yeah, what about the Commonwealth of Australia? And while they're scratching their heads, he opened his satchel, pulled out this old rag and said, what about this for a flag for Australia? The flag, the name and the Constitution all came from that one man. But these four men, particularly Griffiths and Deakin and Barton, so, as Clark called it, messed up his Constitution that he did not even vote for the ratification of the Constitution for us to become a federation. He was so disgusted with what these men had done to move us away from becoming a democracy. And that is the tragic story, even the swindle that took place in us having and getting a constitution that doesn't fit 120 years later. It doesn't work for this country.
Yeah, so that pretty much also answers that, the second part of that question I had was whether you see it as being fit for purpose anymore now in 2026 and from 1991, yeah.
And so let me pick up on that. Why is it not fit for purpose? Well, they actually tried to do this. They had the New South Wales Constitution and they tried to mould it. So you still had the monarch who had her or his viceroy, the Governor General, and they were supposed to be running the government. But then you had a legislature and they played around with that. So what they did with Clark's document is they were after control, so parliamentary control. So they were replacing the prince in the palace to the prince in the parliament. So they moved the document around and put the section on the legislature up front and moved the control of the government, which seemed to be, into number 2 position. They then made the strength of the Governor General virtually to nothing. And today he is just Mr. Autopen, because there's clauses that say that the advisors, the Executive Council advising the Governor General, shall all be members of the Parliament. So then they changed it so it wasn't advise, it was do what this Executive Council told him to do. So what actually happens is that the legislature becomes powerful and they, without anything in the Constitution, decide that they're going to have a Prime Minister. But the Prime Minister, a cabinet and a party are not in our Constitution. They are constitutionally illegitimate, unlawful. And yet these 3 elements are running our country and reducing our Governor General, as I said, to Mr. Autopen. So they then run the government. So all those bureaucrats are answerable to ministers who are answerable to the Prime Minister. So we can have a Prime Minister who's on a plane going off to the UN and he can just decide that Australia is going to recognise a Palestinian state. Well, how does that happen? Well, because I thought it was a good idea. Well, what do you think the Americans are going to say? Oh, but mate, my links are to China and this great big voting group out in the western suburbs of every city who are Muslim, and I need to make sure that they're going to vote Labor. And it's just a pure personal political idea that any Prime Minister has, and it becomes law. So we don't need someone running the legislature. The other thing was that Constitution, they tried to move Clark's idea of an independent judiciary, a high court that the Governor General was to appoint, to the Parliament. Don't you worry about that. We'll take care of the High Court and we'll appoint our judges. Well, that wasn't going to work either. But the High Court, this legal fraternity business where the judges all know the other judges and they all know the lawyers, and it depends on who you know and who you're drinking with as to whether things actually move in your favour or not in our law courts, is something that also needs to be fixed. So our Constitution is not fit for purpose because it doesn't actually reflect what is taking place. Or you could say our Prime Minister, Cabinet and parties are not fit to suit our Constitution. So there's a misfit, but they make it work to suit themselves. The other important thing of why it doesn't fit is we don't have one democratic word or principle in our Constitution. We were never meant to be a democracy. Oh, yes, we vote. and we vote for the same old people each time around. So we end up with this duopoly, or whatever it is, of just Coles and Woolworths, the two parties, that just basically will change seats, and you can be the opposition and you can say how much you don't like what we say. Then we'll get in, and then you can be the opposition, and then you can, in question time, say how much you don't like what we're doing. So it's just this, we build into this conflict model. So nothing moves forward. There's no intelligence. It's just on what seems to be politically viable or where the money's going. So yes, you can understand why so many people are just disgruntled with the whole system, because it doesn't matter really, as they think, who gets in, because it'll be the same group of bureaucrats that are running our country. Yes, there is a period now where we need to have a look again at a system of democratic government.
Yeah, and what you just said ties back to the whole issue with Inglis Clark. He obviously put together a much more comprehensive document, as your researchers found out, and it would have been a much better system under that, as far as you're concerned.
Oh, without a doubt. The thing that it's probably slowed him down with the American model, and remember that the people he's talking to were, what was this, about 1890. So you've got more than 100 years of the US Constitution working. So they've got 100 years to see what works and what doesn't work. And so a fellow by the name, what is his name? I can't do it. A great American scholar and a judge with the Massachusetts Supreme Court was talking to him and said, the Constitution needs to become a living document so that you're able to keep it refreshed, so that people can participate. So the Americans have referendums on issues that the public want with each election. So you vote for whoever, and then there's a section on referendums where you can tick something to do something with education or roads or something else to actually force the government. We don't. There's also a need, I think, to limit the terms of politicians, like with the president. So they're only in for 4 or 8 years, and it has to be refreshed. So you don't get career politicians as we have. So there's a number of things, I think. So if Andrew Clark had his way and there was not a monarch overseeing the Governor General, then the thing that is missing is the American model of voting for a president or the executive who runs the government and take it away from the legislature. So he actually would have had that, I no doubt. But he was stuck with then, how did I give power in this document to the Governor General, which he did, and that was taken out of the document by the time it got passed.
Yeah, so things would have been totally different. And you already hinted at the fact, and we talk about it obviously here with Australians for Better Government, about this whole separation of powers, and how our the Senate or the legislative councils, should really have independence, not be aligned with political parties, because you get this, you get this power, you don't get this power separation then in that. But the other thing that we talk about quite a bit, obviously, is competent people. Now, if the Governor General was able to elect or select competent people from nationwide within that had industry experience, rather than ministers that given portfolios that have no experience in that whatsoever. So that's another major thing that's wrong. And I think even Queensland doesn't even, I think your state there in Queensland doesn't even have a legislative council or Senate. That's correct, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know how they rigged that one. It must have, and it gets worse than that. It's 360 days in a year, and our Queensland Parliament meets for less than 40. They only put in a month's work, and you think, how much are you guys getting paid? I mean, they've got nothing to do. But here's the situation for the federal government as well as Queensland. Why don't we need a parliament? Well, because the bureaucrats are running it, aren't they? And it doesn't matter what David Christopher promised to get elected. The moment he was in, and he said, I've got these great ideas, and we need to do this, and I want to change education. And the bureaucrats said, well, that's lovely, Minister. We hear what you're saying, Minister. But we've got this 4-year financial plan for education. And we'd like to consider what ideas you've got, But if you're still around in 4 years and you've still got the same idea, we'll be happy to put it into the next round of spending. And I've been there, and I've been in those conversations. And then the minister swears and he bangs his desk. Well, what am I going to do? He says, oh, Minister, we've got this great lineup of little brochures about all the wonderful work you're going to do with the highways over the next 3 years. But you're doing them anyway. Yes, Minister, but we'll scrub out the name of the last fellow and we'll put your name in instead. And the poor fellow just stood there, swore some more, and wondered what on earth he was there for. And they said, well, we hate to tell you, Minister, but we do have a flower show that you can run along and there's some member of the royal family that will be visiting this month, and you can go along and do that. So we have a major problem, as do America really, with the mandarins, the faceless, nameless, terribly overpaid bureaucrats who behind the scenes are running our government, and that has to be fixed. We have to be able to sack them. We have to be able to sue them. All that business to do with the COVID, where were the bureaucrats that were pushing all of that stuff? Why don't we have them up before the courts for what they did to this country? Because the ministers didn't know. I've been talking to my left-hand medical person here. In Queensland, the left-hand medical person, she got rewarded by being promoted to become the governor of the state. And she was this doctor that was leading us apart. Excuse me while I get excited about this wonderful topic called politics. And that's a fundamental problem. When you're talking about people getting promoted that don't have skill, I mean, I really like Jacinta Price and what she's doing, but for her to be offered the Ministry of Defence was an absolutely stupid idea. What does she know about the front end to the back end of a gun or a tank or a missile? Nothing. Well, why would you have someone like that in charge of defence? Does she know anything about military strategy? Perhaps. No, not a thing. Well, this is ridiculous. Well, why would you do that? Oh, we're moving her up the ranks and she's getting more noticed, and that's what we want. Oh, she doesn't have to run the department. We've got a few old generals that are doing that, and we don't have anything in defence anyway. We don't have a decent ship, and we got 3 tanks and they need repair, so it won't be a hard job. So this is a problem of rewarding people in this ministry, this little blasted hierarchy within the party. What's the American system? If the president's going to appoint someone, Department of Labor, they have to have some experience or medicine or whatever. They need to know the subjects. Not only does he say, that I'm going to bless you 20 people and you can be my secretaries of state. We officially call them ministers of state. It's the same old English term. Then it goes before the Senate, and they will go through and see whether this person is actually going to be able to do their job. We don't. When does anybody check whether Jacinta Price has the capacity to run the Department of Defence? We don't. None. She just gets appointed or moved around, or we call it a reshuffle of these same old people and same old faces. So there are a lot of things that we could do to fix our government. And yes, it's time somehow the passion for this country got to the point that we want, and not the politicians and the lawyers, we want democracy for our country.
Yeah, no, well said. We the people, and this is the thing, that's why, organisations like Australians for a Better Government kicked off, and, Stephen, as a co-founder of it, was passionate about trying to get this conversation out there and look at how we can change things, as well as other organisations, I believe, are doing the same. But I wanted to go back, and you already hinted on it quite slightly in regards to this idea about people being disenfranchised. And this is something that I wanted to unpack a little bit further with you. And if we use a bit of an example here in South Australia, I've been following stuff here in South Australia for a little while, and I just wanted to come and have a look at this quick little numbers here. And I just wanted people, the essential statistics there, it shows that the electors that were enrolled in South Australia was 1.317 million. The votes counted were 1.167 million. It's a difference of about 150,000. So what that indicates, Chris, is that 150 South Australians, and Australia isn't a huge state. It hasn't got massive population, but that's 150,000 people that were enrolled to vote that chose not to vote. And then if you look at that number underneath, the informal votes, as a lot of people often know them as donkey votes, is another 50,000.
Wow.
If you have a look at that, if you add those together, that's 200,000 South Australians that did not effectively vote for anybody. So 150 that were enrolled and chose not to, and then 50,000 went out there and voted and stuffed it up, drew a, whatever profanities on their ballot sheet, or not completed them all. And this is the concern, that you are the disenfranchised Australians. Now they say there's groups and individuals that have got quite a following that are encouraging fellow Australians not to vote. And it reflects, obviously it reflects because here's quite a substantial number in South Australia. Even though you see the failings of our current constitution and how it's not fit for purpose, and it should have been sort of, more adapted to Inglis Clark's model, what is your thoughts about Australians just walking away and not voting at all on that? What is your thoughts on that? Are you still, while we're muddling through, are you encouraging people to still be actively involved, or do you tend to agree that they need to pull back and go, well, whatever, it's not going to work anyway? What's your thoughts on that? Because it's a big one for me. I've been following it for a little while. Right?
All right, I got four thoughts. Let's see if I can remember four responses to what you said. The first one is we have now a very large population that are percentage of our population were not born in this country. And I know, having been an expat and lived in 5 of the regions of the world in my life, that when you're an expat, you basically are a cutout of participation anyway, because if you're in Singapore, you're not going to get to vote for the Singaporean government, and certainly not in the Middle East. So people that come from overseas, if they don't, they don't have any sort of sense of desire to participate in a foreign country. So the more of those we have, the more people who are just don't care. So if you will have a very large proportion of the Arab community, Indian community, and certainly, the Chinese community that just are alienated. They want to be alienated, aliens to this political system. So that'd be worth looking at. They don't even bother to go along to vote, and wouldn't even know that they could or should. That's the first thing. The second thing that's similar is, with both people born in this country or coming in from overseas and attending school, and I've talked to David Christopher about this, there is a need to teach civics in our school as well as Australian history. Our younger generation know nothing of our Australian history because it's not taught. If you're doing a course in Australian history, they waffle on about relationships to Indonesia or something. There's nothing and correct information about our history. And so there's no push to build pride in this country. The other thing that needs to be taught is civics. Civics, if they taught it through school like they do in America, people emerge from school and they know their constitution, they know their government, they know how to participate. They've got some sense of the history of how their social compact and politics work in this country. So the first thing is we've got a lot of people that come in, are now here, that have no desire to participate. Second one, their children and children who are born here are not given any education as to how and why they should care about this country. The third aspect of it is that this business of people not participating in politics has a history in this country. We brought in compulsory voting, basically so that the party who thought people who were working in labour positions, I've got to think of a word, menial tasks or some other thing, would vote for Labor or vote for them. So if we make it compulsory, we'll force all these people to vote. So the moment we didn't have compulsory voting, we'd have a completely change of what happens with our voting system. So yes, the people. There was reading an article even written in 1990, in the 1990s, that were expressing the same problem. People are not turning out to vote. They're disenfranchised. They don't feel like it's their government. And it's surprising to hear that that's a 30-year-old set of articles that could have been published last week. The fourth thing is that you see people are turning to One Nation, the party One Nation, because they're disgusted with the two parties and the Woolworths and Woolies oligarchy that seem to be pushing and always in there and never really making any changes. And I think that's a good thing. We need to break that oligarchy. And we need to get people in that care about this country. And you've got to give it to Pauline. I mean, she has been there in the system for just years. And I know she has a lot of complaints for the Parliament. But tell me something that she says that's not right. Because certainly others will be there correcting her. When I first met Pauline, I went along to one of their executive meetings. I don't know how, but there I was looking at these people. And it was time for lunch. It was a Sunday. And so there I was with Pauline, and she was trying to discover who I was. And we walked down the street and everything was closed. And the only thing that was open was a fish and chip shop. So I think that's just marvellous that Pauline was there talking to them about fish. And we had fish and chips for my first lunch with Pauline. She actually called me at one stage and said she wanted me to run with her and get into politics. But as we talked, I said, well, I wouldn't ever run for the lower house, your house of your legislative, whatever it is. I'd only run for the Senate. And she said, why? I said, well, I've worked in the American system and I know how to work in politics as a senator. So I talked Pauline into running as a senator because I said you will have more ability, etc., and you're in for longer term than you do in the House of Representatives. So this is a bit of background, but she's kept it up and kept there, and people are looking for a strong alternative, and they're looking for someone who can stand there with Australian values. We're sick to death of welcoming people to our own country. We're sick to death of people telling us you can't use the words him and her. And we're sick to death of being told that we invaded this country and we don't have any right to be here. And there's a lot of other things we're very upset about with the way this country is being run. So I personally think that the first step to actually changing the system that we've got is for people to be voting for independence that forces whoever's in to be listening to individual voices and then telling the bureaucrats what we want to do and not just listening to what they're saying. This is what we are doing regardless of who's in politics. So I think there's four things on that. But there's a big need to distill some pride in this country. And I was very, very pleased to see the size of these marches that started off to be anti-immigration marches. I mean, how on earth can one of our children, a 20-year-old, save up $1 million in order to have a deposit in order to buy a house? I mean, it's ridiculous. And when I hear that the highest cause of death for males under the age of 34 in this lucky country is suicide. They don't have hope. They don't have meaning. They don't have any opportunities to ever be able to own an own home. And the law courts are just so against them anyway, and anti-family, that you can, you think, well, why would you commit suicide? And there it is, depression, loneliness, lack of hope and meaning. And we've got to do something to reinstill pride in Australia. So there is a need for what you fellas are doing in challenging people to form a better government and take pride in this country.
Yeah, exactly. And part of that is obviously with your experience and talking into these things, it's really invigorating and encouraging people to be involved and to really change things and turn things around. Because all those things you mentioned, it almost seems like it's happening all around the West, but in Australia in particular, it's hitting us very hard. So definitely things need to change. And I guess that kind of brings me to the point is like you. So it sounds like part of what you were saying was a little bit about compulsory voting. The argument for that is twofold. Ultimately, you're going to get people that want to change things to be involved and vote, and those that don't really give a damn, whether they be from other countries or whatever, they just don't participate, and because otherwise they'll just vote for whoever, and it might not be the best result. Quickly, just wanted to ask what your thoughts are in regards to, should there be a limit or a restriction on new Australians, so people coming here, a period of time before they can actually vote for what's best for this country? Should there be a limit on them when they can actually be eligible to vote? What's your quick thoughts on that?
The whole idea of citizenship needs a total relook. When you look at the American declaration, pledge, when you're becoming a citizen, you're pledging that you denounce all other authorities, and that you will be prepared to defend this country. And what's our say? I promise to eat a Vegemite sandwich on Boxing Day. I mean, it is this sort of passive, no committal, well, maybe, sort of, I really love being in this country. Well, is it just to love the welfare system? What is it? And if we actually say, are you prepared to defend this country? What is it? 1/3 of young adults say, no, I'd leave. Well, what's happening there? Why do you hold citizenship? Why are you receiving benefits, et cetera, et cetera? Why is the society supporting you if you're not prepared to support the society? So that whole business of citizenship needs to be shaken up. The business about visas and how people become residents Australians and who's getting that needs to be seriously looked at. And it's confusing to me. I meet some people that are from England, and they tell me that they've been struggling for years to become citizens, even though their children live here. Perfect people. And then others are walking in and saying, oh, well, you know, what you do is that you want to start a business and you need a lady from one of the African countries was telling me this outside church the other week. She said, well, what you do is that you have to have $100,000 invested in a company. So, all right, you borrow the $100,000 and you've got to have it in the company or whatever it is for at least 6 months. So here's my $100,000 and here's the company. Oh, well, you can then proceed to the front of the line and you can get citizenship. I may have this a little wrong. And then what happens in the 7th or 8th month, they sell that company and the money onto the next person. So they've got their money back and they've got citizenship. And the next person does the 6 or 7 months and they sell it. So you can see that this one lot of money is moving down the line. And there's got to be a whole rethink about citizenship, about civics in school, and actually people being prepared to give up their second passport. If you want to be an Australian, there has to be something that actually limits the use. It's no good giving it to people. They toddle back to India and they're still getting social welfare. I'm generalising there. I know that it's possible you have to be back every 6 months or once a year or whatever it happens to be. But there's a lot of ripping off the system, I think, that goes on. And that whole system of citizenship, of living in this country, residency and visas needs a total cleanup.
Seems like our current government isn't interested in that. I mean, we've got a massive housing crisis, cost of living, all that. I think latest numbers I saw for the last quarter was still just under 100,000 migrants allowed into the country when we've got so many issues going on. So they just don't seem to be interested in any of that there for that at all. So I guess if another point I wanted to raise, then obviously there's so much wrong. So there's a constitution that is out of date. There's obviously we're not teaching civics. We lack of pride in our country. You mentioned about how people are just so disenfranchised suicide rates are astronomical. Even where young boys, our men, are being told that they're just useless, should feminize them, and all this sort of stuff. There's so much going on. Some discussions I've been having is with people in regards to the idea of citizen-initiated referenda, to be able to give we the people more power back.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on the CIR kind of models that are being used in other countries? But I think America has some states that are doing it. What's your thoughts there?
What's the CSR? Did you say? What is it?
Citizen-initiated referenda, or people.
Absolutely necessary. Totally necessary. I mean, let's take the Bondi massacre, and the Prime Minister says, "Oh no, I don't think we need to look into that. It was just a couple of crazy Muslims." And what is it? Someone could correct me. Was it 600,000 signatures on a petition? And he said, "Oh, all right," but it had to come to that extent to get him, not a cabinet, not a governor general, to get him to say, "All right, you can have a commission." But I'm going to get one of my old friends, a girlfriend that's living on the south side of Sydney, and she could be the commissioner, and so you're going to get nothing by the time she finishes with it. It's an absolute necessity that we bring in citizenship sponsored referendum. Absolutely. Here's another little travesty. With the separation of powers, we think it's a separation between the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. It is. But in a federation, it's also a separation of powers between the states and the federal government. And the original documents do have that separation of powers. But there's some clause in there that allowed the federal government to be slowly taking things back, which they've done. But the ultimate nail in the coffin was when the pandemic was here, and the Prime Minister said, "Oh, I'm really out of my depth. I'm losing sleep. My tea is getting cold. I've got so many worries. I need to get the premiers of the states together, and we'll form some sort of federal club, a little conference or a committee, and we'll all sit and feel good together, sing Kumbaya, and then we'll all decide we're doing this for the nation. And all the states will now fall in line and do what I want to do at the national level anyway." It is the greatest travesty to the separation of powers and the rights of the states. No wonder people just are looking at the national government and think, why would I bother? Where is local participation? How do I even get to involved in state matters? Well, you can, right? And somebody who works for a minister, hopefully he's got a degree, or she is, in something that they know what they're talking about, and you'll get a form letter back. But the other thing that totally needs a revival is our local governments, and way too much power, way too much intimidation of citizens. And I live on the Gold Coast, and the mayor here is Tom Tate. And Tom and I were at some event a few months back. It was all tuxedos and bow ties. And because he was the guest speaker coming from the Gold Coast in Brisbane, and it was all these young men and women, it was maybe a good group of university students all dressed up. When after Tom gave his talk and sat down, there was nobody that was sitting there with the mayor of the Gold Coast in this sort of major city, and he was there by himself. So Tom knows me, so I went up and sat with him and said, "How are you, Tom? And lovely to see you, mate." And he's got a copy of my book, by the way. And I said, "Tom, I've got something to tell you." I said, "I've been living on the Gold Coast now for 7 years. And of all the tradesmen and people that I have met over those 7 years, there is not one person, Tom, there is not one person that I've met that has a good word for the Gold Coast Council." I said, "Tom, the people of the Gold Coast hate your council. They absolutely hate your council, because everybody has got a story about intimidation, raids. It's a bit like that Monty Python scene with the Inquisition and the 4 guys running in the red coats. This is the Inquisition. And they might as well have Gold Coast Council stamped on their shirt. But people tell me, "Oh, Brisbane's just the same," et cetera, et cetera. Something needs to be done about councils and people's participation in local government. And something desperately needs to be done so that we actually get, again, participation in our state governments. And again, something needs to be done where we're taking back our state rights from the federal government. So why would you want to get involved in a government that's 1,000 miles away, that's always on TV, and nothing they do seems to affect me anyway? So someone said to me, Australia, they called it the credit card utopia, where people just live in the suburbs and, spend and have their wonderful little lives, and of course cut themselves off from anything that has to do with organising and running this society. And that is a downright national shame.
Yeah, it's also dangerous because it allows those in our system, our current system, to legislate and make rules that ultimately are detrimental to us in the long term, right?
Yeah.
And because you mentioned councils, and a lot of people in the circles I talk in as well, councils are a massive issue. The state government, federal government. One of the things that consistently comes up, even with One Nation, haven't been holding back on this. They seem to be the only ones calling it out. Is this influence from internationalists and international groupthink organisations like the UN, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization. So they seem to have way too much influence over what we do in our nation and the stuff that's been implemented even at the council level, state level, and federal level. Have you got a sense of that, or do you agree with that?
No, it's a form of globalism, isn't it? I mean, let's all just move all power to one, international global body. It sort of reminds me of the Vogons coming to take over the earth, and they're just going to bulldoze it. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and they just think we're all just one planet and we're one consortium, etc. So again, what's happening with the UN? So many smaller countries have moved in and found rights, and it's become terribly, terribly liberal. And even when I was working in the US Congress, congressmen, Republicans, were not happy with the UN many years ago, and certainly Donald Trump is not happy with the UN at all. And I mean, he's just going to pull. Stephen asked me, it must be 6 months ago, he had me on a podcast, and he just sort of dropped a question on me. He said, well, what do you think Donald Trump, or what's going to happen in the world in the next 6 months? And he caught me off guard. I said, but here's two things I think is going to happen. One is America is going to get out of the UN. They have just had enough of these small countries telling them what they could and shouldn't do, and America's paying for it. I said the other thing that's likely to happen is America's going to get out of NATO. And you can see that there's still that friction going on. So the head of NATO is desperately trying to get the Americans and their money and troops to stay in NATO. And Donald said, well, if we stay, your whole NATO idea needs a total rehash. We've got to do something about the way you people aren't participating. So this business of the oil in Iran is realigning the geopolitical landscape. It with Donald's attitude towards his NATO friends and Australia is one side of it. The other side is what's happening with the Arab world. And what is happening there, something that has never happened before, with a number of the Muslim states aligning together with America and Israel. And what Iran has done in bombing the UAE and Qatar is just another nail in their coffin, because this terror funding country with Chinese money and weapons is now getting pushed further and further into the cold. And so we're going to block the strait. Well, do you think Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE are happy about that? Well, no, they're not. So there's this realigning, and it's some tremendous amount of money that the Saudis had put into. Donald Trump wanted $6 trillion. He said, I want $6 trillion of foreign money invested in this country. Well, I think the Saudis have put in almost that themselves, some tremendous amount of money that Saudi Arabia is investing in the United States. So we are at a very interesting time in politics. This is as significant as the collapse of the Berlin Wall, and we're sitting in it in this month in this major event of the changes of the geopolitical alignment. Where does this come and affect Australia? Well, firstly, you can see how the governments have totally neglected any concept of our own economy or protecting our own people. You know, everybody that wants to manufacture anything goes overseas because you can't afford the labour here. The unions have basically run us to the wall. There's so many regulations. It's incredible to even think about it. So with a growth of nationalism, it's not just a political issue in as much as who we're voting for. It's a political national issue of what we are going to do for our country. I know I'm taking a bit of time on this, but here's a point. Lachlan Macquarie was the governor from 1810 to 1820, and he brought in a whole program that resulted in him being called the father of the nation. And he was influenced by a number of young men who were convicts, had been convicts, and were all millionaires in their 30s. And in talking to these fellas, they said, prosperity. We know how to make this country prosperous. And he said to them, well, what do you want me to do? They said, the infrastructure. We need roads, we need churches, we need schools, we need asylums, we need docks. We need a stack of things. We need insurance, shipping insurance. We need currency. We need a bank. So he did all of this. And in that period of 10 years, the growth of the population went up 300%. And I thought to myself, what if Australia in 10 years went from 25 million to 75 million? We can't even comprehend that sort of growth. What made that possible is my point. What made it possible was an ideology and a program of prosperity. There was leadership. There was a future. There was shoulders to the wheel. Where are our leaders today? Where is the vision for this country? Where are we going as a country? Well, we don't have to whinge about things. We have something that we are doing. You know, a fellow said to me, we're talking about, I don't know what, and he said, you know, Queensland is bigger than Europe. Mm-hmm. Think about this. My head just went, he said, we have not even started to develop this insanely large country. We haven't even started. And you think, you know, I got up and walked away. What's the problem? Water. Well, fix it. If that's our problem, we got water, we need to move around. Well, fix it. You know, don't say, oh, well, and sell the water rights. You then go and sell the water. Oh, no. That all needs to be taken back. And politicians that are busy playing the game on who owns the water rights and who can take them. Oh, shocking. So those natural resources, those national, the people's resources need to be owned and managed by the people. If we're going to have a future and build this country, we need to take back not just our government, but we need to actually take back our future. And we need leadership. There's no doubt about it. This country needs leadership.
Yeah, and part of that's going to be very hard because, I mean, you know, the federally and at state levels, we're palming a lot of that back to the Aboriginal industry, and so they're, you know, getting a hold of a lot more land. They've got treaties, land rights, reparations. Our state here in South Australia, you know, with a 10% turnout of the Indigenous voice to Parliament has gone down that path. So that's, you know, that's one part of it. I think the other major thing that I think people are starting to push back on, Chris, is the agenda behind climate change and renewables. And I think that's one of the biggest things that have destroyed our manufacturing and our access to resources. So these are the sort of things that definitely need to be talked about. So you've already mentioned a few things, Chris, in regards to what some of your solutions would be. But if you were the governor under Inglis Clark's kind of model, or you were the prime minister, or you had the power. If you were, there we go. If you were the prime minister, Chris, what would be some of the key things that you would do first? So two parts of the question. I can break it up if you like. One is, what do you see needs to be done immediately, and how can we encourage our fellow Australians, we the people, to affect change?
There's a couple of things straight off. Firstly, we need to do something about these bureaucrats and bringing them under control, without a doubt. I mean, they've just got to be clipped. The second thing is being able to appoint people, as we talked about, that have the capacity to do the job. So whatever needs to be changed, that's certainly it. The third thing on the line, after I have this wonderful lunch sitting around and looking at the Sydney Harbour and lobsters and whatever else I'll be drinking and doing if I was Prime Minister. The regulations, all this business that are slowing down the building sites where they've got so many regulations that are just stopping and costing so much for us to be able to put up a building, needs to be incredibly trimmed. The other major problem that we've got with even the elections, when the Constitution was first written, if you worked for the government, you couldn't vote. And so they went and changed that. But today the unions are basically run by civil servants, and the big unions are actually employees by the government. I think that needs a severe investigation. There needs to be an audit on where the money is going for all these 2,000 organisations that are there for the welfare of Aborigines. I mean, anyone that's in that field of work tells you the money does not get through to the people that need it. But that's a big problem. That's not going to be easily solved. And this ridiculous thing called the NDIS might have looked good on paper, but it just needs to be stopped, absolutely stopped, because of and even the Labor government just cannot afford to let this cash register continue to be emptied. So even they're going to do something about their stupid idea of the NDIS, whoever came up with that. So that one, there just needs to be a whole other system. But when you hear 1/3 of our national expenditure is being spent on the welfare of the people, it's ridiculous. And it's something like 1/3 of the population that works is supporting the other 2/3, or something ridiculous like that. It's insane. You cannot continue to run a country off just selling dirt, which is how we do. Well, we get royalties off the resources that we sell, so we're able to have this incredible social welfare system that even Karl Marx wouldn't have believed that was possible. So I think, he wouldn't. So we need to do something. Education was a major one. It needs a total revamp in terms of what is taught, how it's taught. So many foreign students, we say, oh, it's an industry. And I say, well, have you seen the quality of education that is now in a university? I mean, it is so low. Why? Because you've got all these people that come over where English is a second language, cannot meet the standards that used to be there. And so we've dumbed it all down. And I can confirm that as a university professor for years, that you sort of say, well, which university would you send your son to? And in Australia, it'd be none. Mm-hmm. What is it? Only 20% of the students in Australian universities are now Australian. I mean, how insane is that? How insane is that? So I think that whole education structure, so they wouldn't like me by lunchtime either, I don't think, by the time I got into that and fixed that the construction industry, education, or the whole thing with the fuel prices and how that is managed, that needs a total review of the taxes on fuel. And therefore, if you go and put up the price of fuel, and that's what the economy runs on, did you just not create inflation? Oh, you didn't think of that? Well, what do you think is pushing up the inflation? Everything just got more expensive, didn't it? So I think fuel needs a look at. And then when I hear we're not even making our own fertiliser anymore, we don't make fertiliser in Australia. Oh, no, there's a thing about gas that the company that was making it couldn't get the government to give them a licence to do the gas. So this week, they are closing down and looking for ways that we can import fertiliser from somebody else that doesn't have dumb bureaucrats, single-minded agendas, and won't actually do anything to support the growth of this nation. So I think I would, two key words, if I Prime Minister, one is you need to think about the economy, the Australian economy, what is good for this economy. And the second thing is we need to come up with a program of prosperity that's growing things, making things, inventing things, building things. That is the way our country used to be, and that is where we need to go back to. We need to create a future.
Yeah, 100% agree, and I bang on. I bang on with it.
Vote for me. I'll run as an independent. You'll vote for me.
Prime Minister Christopher Reynolds, yeah, and I've said that.
That sounds good. I want a knighthood. It has to be Sir.
Oh, Sir Reynolds, look at that. I think we'll see how we go. We'll see if we can get the voter to agree. And I've said that too, Chris. Like we punched above it for the population we had as a nation growing, like whether it be wartime, whether it be manufacturing, whether it be ingenuity, we punched above our weight in this nation. And I'm a first generation Australian. My parents migrated from German heritage. You know, the Germans were quite ingenious. You know, quite good at manufacturing, but Australians, I think, with just the way they were shaped as a nation, punched above their weight for some reason in every aspect of their life, and it's really important, I think, for Australia to get back to that. And this is the thing. So, what's your suggestion then to the punter on the street? Obviously, there's Australians for Better Government. We're trying to do what we can to get people involved, to have the conversations that we're having with people like yourself. What's your big message to the punter on the street, the average Australian that just wants to see some change? They're disenfranchised. They're seeing the country's a mess. We're buying into globalization. We just want to be able to get back to being a sovereign Australia and be proud to be Australian. What's your message to them?
Firstly, get out and join some great celebrations to be Australian. Here comes Anzac Day. Go along, participate. Go, if your kids go along. You know, their future is what you're doing now. You are creating the future for their lives in what you do. Celebrate all these wonderful things. Laugh a lot. Get out and have a drink with them. Just enjoy being Australian. Get some larrikin in your life just to be here. You know, enjoy what it is to be Australian. The other thing is, apart from enjoying it, I know that there's a stack of groups around that are talking about various political sorts of things. It's not everybody's cup of tea, as it were. But if you are interested, there are groups that you can participate in to learn more. I think we need to create a national movement, and we need to stand up to the political system we've got, because we do have career politicians. And that's not just the people that have been elected. There's a whole industry of people that support the current situation, the status quo, and that needs to be threatened. I've gone and registered a company, and I haven't had time to do it yet. I'm just too busy trying to finish another book called Australians Today Association. And with this website, there's going to be several things to follow up on what I'm saying. There's going to be a shop that you can go and buy for celebration, the T-shirts. You know, when Australia Day was here, I couldn't find a T-shirt. I walked around the malls or whatever, and certainly couldn't find a hat. What about a pair of thongs with Australia on it, you know? And so I want to then sell these things so you can get the T-shirt, the pants, the singlet, the hat. And I'm going to bring back the hat from the Currency Lads, which is a slightly different sort of square of shape. And I'm going to find someone to manufacture it. And I want the long, beautiful coloured scarves that these kids wore around the rocks years ago. I want to bring back our hat, is one thing. So that's in the shop. The other thing you're going to be able to buy, I don't know what menu item, is that I want to enable people to buy, not at a price of any significance, an Indigenous or a Native Australian certificate. How about we all get sick to death of being told that you're getting welcome to your country when I'm a Native Australian? I don't need anybody welcoming me home, especially since I'm only flying from the Gold Coast to Sydney. Why am I getting welcomed home? I want something I'm going to stick on the wall that says, you know, Christopher Reynolds, a Native Australian. And there's probably time when it came to all those things where we filled in the boxes of who you are. It says, are you Indigenous? That we started to all tick yes. Anyway, I ran it past Campbell Newman, who was the Premier up here in Queensland, and he looked at me, he frowned, he looked at the floor, and he looked back at me, and he said, I don't know why nobody's thought of it before. I thought it was a good answer, so I'm going to do it. The other thing I want to do is this business of democracy. We have to get back and understand that we want to be a democratic country, because we're not. So I'm going to set up a site called We the People. And on that, I don't want all the old lawyers and academics all raving on about things that are too esoteric and people can't read or understand them. So it'll be an information site. But I want some good articles where people can start to understand these fundamental Christian ideas of the value of life and the equality of life. The other thing I'm going to do is set up a network page across the states, and you can actually put in an organisation such as Australians for Better Government in the month of April or May. Here is an event. So it just gets a title, and if people are interested, they click on that line and it goes to your website. So it's not a matter of stealing other people's email addresses. It's a matter of being able to grow and fertilize, a good word, fertilize the activities that we do by allowing people who'd say, well, I don't know what's on in my local neighbourhood or my state or whatever, because everybody says, as I move around the country, says, oh, our group is getting smaller and people getting older and we don't know how to contact people. Well, all right, I'll help you contact and talk to each other. So that's a network. I'm going to set up a notice board, We the People, and a shop where you are going to be able to buy an Indigenous Australian certificate to stick on your wall, like these things behind me up here. You can all stick them in your foyer. Oh, Mary, I didn't know you were an Indigenous Australian. Oh, and so is Herbert. Right? Anyway, it's a bit of larrikinism, but that's all right. I feel quite at home.
Yeah, no, that's what we should get back to some of our larrikinism. I think we take ourselves way too serious, and some great pointers there. And look, you know, those meetings and things, you know, constitutional conventions, another thing that we talk about, getting some of those going and getting people involved to talk about and hear about, you know, these type of things from you. But I am going to wind it up, Chris. But you know, people that are listening and you're concerned in New South Wales, you know, should you still attend the events in the Central Coast and so forth, because you've heard Christopher Reynolds talk today. Let me assure you that Christopher has a massive breadth of knowledge and a lot more to talk about. So you won't be disappointed by attending the We the People Empowering a New Age of Government events on Saturday and Sunday, the 2nd and 3rd of May. You'll be able to hear Dr. Reynolds there. And I'm pretty sure, Chris, you won't disappoint. You know, people have listened to you here on this little podcast, talk about a few things, but I'm pretty sure you've got a bit more up your sleeve, where people can actually meet you, shake your hand, talk to you about certain things and ask you further questions. So 100% encourage people to jump along there. And obviously, Chris, you will more than likely have some copies of What a Capital Idea, Australia 1770-1901 by yourself there, that you'll be able to sell and sign for people. So
if I can jump in there, sorry. Yeah, you can just go on your Google search, and if you put in What a Capital Idea or my name, it should come up and fill your phone or your web page. When you get to the website, and you can see the history. It's a history page where you'll see the book. There's a link there. If you want to see some podcasts or watch the little video on the book, you can press the button that says watch the video or watch the YouTube business. But yes, the book, as I said before, is the most accurate record of Australia's history ever published. But you can buy the book online. But I'm promoting it because it's not just sale of another book. It's the sale and the promotion of information about our incredible history. And I encourage people to have a go. And there it is. There's the little buy the book or, watch the video sort of thing. If you love this country and if you want to know more about this country, buy the book.
Yeah, no, here. Well, Chris, I really appreciate your time. We're in about an hour 30, but it hasn't been a boring conversation. I love the way that you present and your Australian larrikinism. So I really appreciate you coming on the Australians for Better Government podcast. And obviously, if people are following along, if you've enjoyed this conversation, if you like what you've heard, then hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, follow along, follow Australians for Better Government as well, and subscribe to the website. As I said, you can find Australians for Better Government at australiansforbetter.com. So, Christopher, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and as we are leading into Anzac Day, I hope you have an amazing Anzac Day, and definitely encourage as many Australians as possible to get out there and enjoy Anzac Day as well. So, God bless you, Chris. All the best, and hope you have a great day.
Thank you very much, Mark. Bye-bye.